Hi. We should talk about redefining our partnership. That was how she began. No lead-in, no warmth. Just that single, deliberate sentence, dropped between us like a line in a contract. I looked up from my plate. We were having brunch, the kind we used to enjoy. Eggs, toast, the Sunday paper on her side of the table. But this wasn't an accident of timing. The choice was deliberate. Broad daylight, casual setting. Public enough to discourage a strong reaction. Her eyes met mine. Calm. Too calm. I set my fork down and waited. She continued. We've both evolved a lot over the past few years, and I think it's natural that our relationship evolves too. She used the word twice. Evolved. A distancing word. Polished. Rehearsed. Her tone didn't match her words either. There was no vulnerability in it, no shared reflection. Just clean delivery. She shifted slightly in her seat, posture perfect. One hand traced the rim of her coffee cup. It's time, she went on, to give each other more personal freedom, space to grow individually. We've both earned that. Another set of carefully chosen phrases. Personal freedom. Space to grow. She wasn't fumbling for language. She was executing a plan. A flicker of memory rose unbidden. Another conversation, years ago, when we'd first moved into this house. Sitting on the floor with boxes still unopened, laughing about the future. Back then, words like us, we, together had filled her speech without thought. Now they were conspicuously absent. I felt something cold begin to settle behind my ribs. She paused, as if waiting for me to challenge her. Testing the water. I didn't. Instead, I leaned back in my chair slightly. That's an interesting idea, I said evenly. What would that look like to you? Her smile flickered, small, but there. A signal she thought I was playing along. Oh, I don't have all the details worked out, she said lightly. But I think it starts with more individual time, more flexibility. Maybe less of the traditional expectations. We can figure it out together. We can figure it out together. A hollow phrase if I'd ever heard one. I nodded once, slow. Makes sense to consider options, I said. In that moment, her body language changed. Shoulders relaxed. She picked up her coffee, took a sip. The tension in her face eased. She believed I was aligned with her narrative. But inside, a different shift was taking place. I wasn't aligned. I wasn't confused either. I'd spent too many years negotiating deals, reading boardrooms, spotting when someone had already made their move. This wasn't an exploration, it was an announcement. The decision had been made long before this conversation began. I was being informed, not invited to participate. And the language, so carefully constructed, told me even more. This wasn't about abstract personal growth. This was about creating distance, erasing obligations, laying groundwork. I scanned the moment with a sharpened lens, the slight quickness of her breath when I didn't react strongly, the strategic calm in her voice. This was a maneuver, not a mutual decision. Why now? Why this framing? And what was she preparing for? I didn't know. Not yet. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't find out by arguing, by tipping my hand. I forced a neutral smile. You've given this a lot of thought. She gave a small, practiced laugh. It's been on my mind. I believe that much, at least. We went back to our meal. Conversation drifted to neutral topics. Plans for the week, a friend's birthday, house repairs. On the surface, everything looked normal again. But beneath it, something fundamental had shifted. She thought the conversation had gone her way. She thought I was absorbing the idea on her terms. But I was no longer reacting. I was observing. And somewhere behind that polished language and calm facade, something was being hidden. I intended to find out what. In the days after that conversation, I played my part. Outwardly, life went on. We still shared meals, exchanged polite texts, slept in the same bed, though I noticed the space between us growing, subtle but measurable. Her affection had shifted. Where before there had been casual touches, her hand on my arm as she passed, a glance held a beat longer. Now there was distance, coolness disguised as busy distraction. And then there was her schedule. She'd always been organized, her calendar meticulously maintained. Shared between us, color-coded, blue for her events, green for mine, yellow for both. A week after the brunch talk, new entries began to appear. Personal Development Group, 7 p.m. Wellness Workshop, Weekend Retreat. Creative Collaboration Meeting, 6 p.m. Harmless words. Progressive, even. But they marked time she had never carved out before. Blocks of it. Entire evenings, weekend days. And always solo. I noticed something else. She began dressing differently for these events. Subtly at first, more careful with her appearance. Then it became more pronounced. Dresses she hadn't worn in months. New shoes. A new handbag I didn't recognize. Still, I said nothing. I watched, logged every change. Then came the first concrete crack. One Thursday night she left for what she called a wellness retreat, an overnight trip, car packed, casual goodbye. No reason to suspect the destination. Except the following afternoon, while scanning our bank account, something caught my eye. An $380 charge at a downtown restaurant, a place I knew well. Upscale. Not a casual wellness stop. The timestamp, 9:17 p.m. the night she was supposedly at the retreat. I stared at the entry for a long moment. The name of that restaurant wasn't in her usual orbit. It wasn't near any retreat center she might attend. And certainly not the kind of place one goes alone on a self-discovery weekend. A logical voice in my head offered the easy explanation. Maybe a friend met her, maybe plans changed. But logic wasn't what my gut was giving me. I pulled up her calendar for that night. Still listed. Wellness retreat, out of town. No mention of dinner. No update. No text from her during that time, either, just a message the next morning. Great night, really needed this space. Back tomorrow. The moment I saw that heart emoji, the cold in my chest deepened. Not because of the symbol itself, but because it was performative, placed deliberately. A line meant to signal closeness, while covering for distance. I began pulling older statements, methodically. 1 month back. 2. Cross-referencing calendar entries with expenses. A pattern started to form. Charges at high-end spots on nights where her calendar told another story. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation would only trigger the defensive script she had clearly prepared. Instead, I did what I'd always done when something smelled wrong in business. Gather information quietly. Build the case first. That weekend, we had dinner at home. On the surface, everything appeared normal. She chatted about a new podcast, asked about my upcoming meetings, but the warmth wasn't there. Her eyes flickered to her phone often. When she smiled, it didn't reach them. Halfway through the meal, a stray thought struck me, sharp enough to pause my fork midair. How long had she been planning this? I glanced across the table. The woman sitting there looked the same. Same features, same gestures. But the connection between us, the thing that once made even the smallest conversation rich, had thinned almost to nothing. And I knew then, this wasn't about growth. This wasn't about personal evolution. This was about escape, and possibly replacement. The following Monday, I took a new step, quietly downloaded full financial exports from our joint accounts, began reviewing line by line. I also scheduled a casual drink with an old colleague, one who happened to move in similar social circles as my wife's professional world. We met at a quiet bar midweek. After some conversation, I steered the topic gently toward recent events, mutual acquaintances. That's when something unexpected surfaced. You know, he said, swirling his glass, I've seen your wife around a few times lately. More than usual. Usually with this guy. What's his name? Works in consulting. They're often at these leadership mixers. Seems like they're close. He said it without malice. No hidden agenda. Just an offhand comment. But for me, it was a knife sliding deeper. I didn't show it. Kept my tone easy. Didn't know they moved in the same circles. Small world. Inside, the gears were turning fast. Consulting. Leadership mixers. Personal development, events. The profile fit too neatly. As I left that night, cool air hit my face harder than expected. I walked slowly to my car, mind tracing back over the past months. The missing warmth, the rehearsed speech, the carefully planted language about redefining us. It wasn't about freedom. It wasn't about space. It was about someone else. And from this point forward, observation would no longer be enough. It was time to investigate. I began on a Sunday night, alone in my office while she attended what her calendar now called Creative Leadership Intensive. Another euphemism. Another late evening out. The house was silent. Only the low hum of the computer as I opened spreadsheets, bank portals, statement archives. In business, due diligence was routine. Now, I turned that same discipline inward. First, the credit cards. Patterns emerged quickly. New charges at unfamiliar spots, clustered around nights labeled personal growth events, wine bars. boutique hotels, luxury retail. Then, bank transfers. A new savings account, opened 6 months ago. Smaller deposits funneled in regularly, amounts that wouldn't raise alarms but added up steadily. She was isolating assets. I pulled every export I could get my hands on, compiled them into a running ledger, documented discrepancies with screenshots, time-stamped and archived. Next came behavior tracking. I stopped relying on her shared calendar. Instead, I quietly began logging real movement. Time of departures, returns, outfits, demeanor. Notes cross-referenced with transaction times and third-party events. Patterns tightened. Certain nights, she left in casual attire but returned in full makeup, hair freshly done. Other nights, she'd mention one location but charges appeared in another district entirely. The data painted a story far clearer than her words. I needed one more layer, context from outside our walls. That's when I reached out to Sam. Sam wasn't just a friend, he was someone I trusted implicitly, level-headed, discreet. We'd known each other for a decade through work circles. We met for lunch downtown. Neutral ground. Over the meal, I laid out the situation in broad strokes. Some things aren't adding up. I'm running a quiet audit before I confront. No dramatic revelations, just enough to enlist an ally. Sam listened carefully, then leaned in. "You're not crazy," he said. "I've seen her out a few times myself lately, not always solo." I kept my tone steady. "Anyone I'd know?" He hesitated. "Possibly. There's a guy from her consulting group, name's Eric something. They've been pretty visible at these mixers, more than once." Eric. Now there was a name to match the profile. After lunch, I did what I do best, research. It didn't take long. Eric D., mid-40s, partner at a boutique consultancy firm. Heavy presence in transformational leadership circles, exactly the type of events she'd been attending. Public photos surfaced easily, and in more than one event gallery from recent months, there they were, my wife and Eric. Close, familiar, smiles a little too rehearsed, distance between them too small. Confirmation wasn't relief. It was clarity, and with it, cold resolve. But I wasn't ready to confront. Not yet. There was more beneath this surface. Returning to the financial audit, I expanded scope, joined investments, property, her professional email archives, access through an old shared login she'd forgotten about. That's where I found the next signal. An email thread to a divorce strategy coach. Not labeled that way officially, of course, the site marketed. Navigating personal transitions with empowerment. But buried in the conversation was this line. How do I document emotional distance or lack of support so that legal positioning is stronger? The message was timestamped 2 months before the Redefinition brunch. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was scripting a narrative. Lack of support. Emotional distance. The setup was clear. Paint me as controlling, unevolved, resistant to her growth. I stared at the screen for a long time. There was pain, yes, but it was being swallowed by something sharper, strategy. She was trying to engineer an outcome. Not simply escape, win, secure leverage, control the story, both socially and legally. And now I knew. I didn't sleep much that night. But when morning came, my course was set. I booked an appointment with a top-tier family law attorney, quietly, without triggering alerts, secured recommendations through discreet channels, began the intake process, locked key financial accounts, moved personal assets to protected positions, documented everything. In business, first mover advantage matters. The same applied here. By the end of the week, I had a working file, timeline of events, financial discrepancies, public sightings, email evidence. The pieces were aligning faster than even I'd expected. And yet, in the quiet moments between actions, the emotional weight pressed in. I found myself remembering the early days again, our first cross-country trip, building our home office together, her laugh on late nights when the world felt simpler. That made this colder. Not because love remained, but because the contrast was now undeniable. She wasn't the person sitting across from me on those nights. She was someone else, someone orchestrating an exit with surgical calculation. I no longer hoped for innocence. That door had closed, but I would control the next steps, methodically, without giving her the reaction she had clearly prepared for. She wanted a performance, an outburst to fit her script. She wouldn't get one. By now, observation wasn't enough. The pieces had formed a clear pattern, but I needed hard proof, not just suspicion, not just second-hand comments. I shifted from passive tracking to active evidence gathering. First, Eric. I dug deeper into his world. Social media profiles were mostly curated and safe, but professional event listings weren't as controlled. I mapped the last 6 months of leadership conferences, panel talks, workshops. Sure enough, her calendar entries overlapped repeatedly with his appearances. Then came the clincher. An acquaintance from one of my corporate partnerships forwarded an event gallery from a private leadership retreat, high-end, invite-only, designed for executive transformation. There they were, my wife and Eric, captured in multiple frames, posed at dinner, walking together between sessions, close enough that no professional explanation could sanitize it. It was an ongoing relationship, intentional, carefully maintained. I wasn't guessing anymore. The next move was legal. My attorney, a seasoned litigator named Mark, reviewed the file I'd built. When he finished, he leaned back. She's laying groundwork to claim emotional neglect, isolation of funds, and likely a controlling narrative. But he tapped the screen. With this level of premeditation and the financial moves she's made, she'll have a hard time maintaining that in court. I nodded. That's why I'm here now. I want to stay ahead of every step. Together we outlined a plan. Secure critical accounts. Document joint asset shifts. Preemptively block unauthorized withdrawals. Prepare the cleanest possible filing. First strike advantage. By the time I left his office, the path was clear. She'd been laying legal traps, but now they were visible. What I hadn't expected was the next twist, something that added an entirely new dimension. That week, during another review of her archived emails, I found a forwarded message from Eric. Subject line: Draft ideas for positioning. Attached was a document, clearly a draft talking points outline, legal angles, public narrative suggestions, even phrasing on how to describe me as unsupportive of her professional growth. But one section stopped me cold. Be prepared to document any emotional outbursts. If provoked strategically, recordings can support your positioning. They weren't just preparing for divorce. They were preparing to orchestrate a narrative, to steer me toward a response they could exploit. The calculation was chilling. Worse still, Eric wasn't just some random new figure. I ran a quick scan of my company's CRM, and there he was. Not directly my client, but married to a client. His wife was a long-standing client at one of our key accounts, someone I'd known for years. Now the stakes were bigger than marriage alone. There was professional fallout potential, a conflict of interest that could ripple if this affair surfaced publicly. In chess terms, I was now looking at a board where every move had to be calculated 10 steps ahead. Emotionally, the weight was growing. There were moments, late at night, lights out, alone in my office, when the betrayal caught in my chest like a stone. Memories came unbidden, her hand in mine during hard business years, quiet moments on the porch with a glass of wine, plans whispered about future travel. Now, those same hands were penning legal narratives to frame me. And the man she was plotting with, connected to my professional world, represented a threat beyond personal loss. But pain wasn't paralyzing. If anything, it clarified. I shifted fully into counter-strategy mode. No emotional slip-ups. No premature confrontation. I hired a private investigator, not for drama, but for clean, court-admissible documentation. Surveillance was set. Movement tracked. Evidence gathered quietly. At home, I maintained normalcy. No change in tone. No disruption to routines. The more she believed I remained in the dark, the less she would adapt. Each morning, we still had coffee. She still asked polite questions about my work. I still answered with calm clarity. But beneath the surface, every word was recorded in my mental ledger. I could sense her growing confidence, more frequent evenings out, looser cover stories, an emerging emotional distance she no longer bothered to mask fully. She thought her redefinition was progressing smoothly. She thought I was still stuck, slowly absorbing her new reality. She had no idea that within days I would have the entire picture in hand, and that I had already begun preparing the move that would shift all leverage back to me. The first full report from the investigator landed late on a Tuesday evening. A simple folder. Professional, clinical. Photos, dates, observations, admissible in court, free of embellishment. There was no longer room for doubt. Multiple confirmed evenings, private hotel bookings, matched to the same dates her calendar still listed as professional development. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came from a second thread the investigator had followed: Eric's life. His wife, Madeline, wasn't just any spouse. She was a senior partner at a client firm of mine, one of the more prominent accounts in our portfolio. Someone I'd met with quarterly for years, someone who trusted me professionally and socially, and, as it turned out, someone entirely unaware of her husband's extracurricular leadership activities. The realization shifted everything. This wasn't simply a breach of trust anymore. Professional risk had entered the game. If this went public, it could create scandal in client circles, reputational damage, contract risk. But it also meant leverage. For the first time since that polished brunch conversation, I felt something other than grief or calculation. I felt momentum. The next proof came from an unexpected angle. While combing through another set of her personal notes, synced inadvertently to an old cloud folder, I found draft legal documents, not formal, but clearly templates she'd been compiling. Sections on narrative framing, notes on evidence to position as controlling, even bullet points outlining potential incidents to document emotional volatility, resistance to her professional evolution. In other words, she wasn't simply preparing a case, she was writing a script. The coaching emails I'd already seen now made perfect sense in context. They weren't exploratory, they were calculated strategies designed to control the outcome. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the depth of it. The woman I'd once trusted implicitly, who had shared my ambitions, my home, my future plans, was architecting not just an exit, but an effort to reshape my reputation and influence legal outcomes. And yet she remained calm, casual at home. That week, we attended a small dinner party with friends. I watched her closely throughout the evening. She was animated, engaged. Her narrative was already at work, subtle references to new growth, redefining life, discovering what really matters, polished, rehearsed. At one point, she touched my arm lightly, as if nothing had shifted. Her eyes met mine, smiling, believing she still controlled the pace of this unfolding story. But by then, I had all the pieces. I'd already engaged my attorney to prepare our own filing, not as a reaction, but as a proactive strike, complete with attached evidence, financial documentation, and a clean narrative that countered her positioning entirely. I'd also quietly reached out to Madeline, through the most discreet channel possible. Not out of malice, out of necessity. Professional risk required professional mitigation. I crafted the message with precision, no accusation, no dramatics, just a request for a private conversation regarding a matter that impacted both our personal and professional worlds. Her response came within hours. Yes. Urgently. That meeting was set for the following week, quiet, off-grid. In the meantime, I continued the dance at home. We still had dinners, still traded morning pleasantries, still projected outward normalcy. But internally, the shift had solidified. There was no more hope for innocence, no more room for emotional wavering. Only a single, clear thought remained. She wasn't just leaving. She was attempting to rewrite reality, to break the narrative of my life and recast it in a version that served her escape. But that plan was about to collapse, completely, and wordlessly. And when it did, she wouldn't see it coming. It happened on a Thursday evening. No particular significance to the date, deliberately so. She just returned from another so-called collaboration session. The familiar pattern, light conversation at the door, coat hung neatly, casual check-in about dinner. I waited until we'd finished eating. Routine maintained, no disruption. After the dishes were done, I asked simply, "Can we sit for a minute? I'd like to share something." She gave a practiced smile. Of course. We sat across from each other in the living room, neutral ground. I'd prepared everything with precision. From beside me, I took out a single envelope, handed it across. She looked down, brows knitting slightly, opened it. Inside, formal divorce filing papers. My filing, not hers. At first, her expression remained composed. "What is this?" she asked, tone light but strained. I met her gaze evenly. "It's my redefinition," I said. Calm, final. For the first time, a flicker of genuine reaction crossed her face, a split second of calculation failing to catch up with the moment. Before she could launch into denial or scripted counterpoints, I continued. "I've taken the liberty of compiling a few supporting materials." I slid a second folder across the table. Inside, verified external documentation, financial irregularities with documentation, copies of her coaching emails, screenshots of her positioning draft notes, hotel bookings, Calendar discrepancies. I watched her carefully as she opened it. At first, she remained still, flipping through pages with mechanical precision. But as the contents deepened, her posture shifted, rigid shoulders, breath catching. When she reached the email thread discussing provoking controlled reactions for legal positioning, her fingers froze mid-page. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Silence stretched between us. I didn't fill it. Silence was its own message now. Finally, her voice came, a faint echo of the polished tone she'd maintained for weeks. "You've misunderstood. This wasn't what it looks like." Her eyes flicked to mine, seeking any foothold. I didn't offer one. "What it looks like," I replied calmly, "is fully documented. You're free to have your attorney review it. The filing is already in motion." For the first time in weeks, the rehearsed confidence cracked visibly. She reached for another page, as if seeking an escape in the documents themselves, but there was none. And then, wordlessness. Not because she lacked vocabulary, but because the structure she'd spent months building had just crumbled, unrecoverable. She couldn't argue the photographs. She couldn't refute the emails, her words, her timeline. She couldn't deny financial movements, black and white, time-stamped. And most of all, she couldn't provoke the outburst her coaching had prepared her to record. I remained still, voice steady. No anger, no pleading, just clarity. After several long moments, she finally spoke again, voice brittle. We should talk about how to handle this privately, for appearances." I met her gaze. "I'm handling it transparently. There's no need for pretense." Another silence. Her hands trembled slightly now, gathering the papers as if sheer motion might rebuild what had been lost. But the reality was undeniable. Her plan had fallen apart. Wordlessly. Not through rage. Not through chaos. Through precision and preparation. I stood slowly. "I'll be staying elsewhere as of tonight," I said. "You'll receive further communication through counsel." She didn't reply. Couldn't. As I left the room, I heard the faintest sound, papers shifting in unsteady hands. But no words followed. She had built a narrative. I had dismantled it. And now, the fallout would begin. The days that followed moved fast, by necessity and by design. My attorney filed the documents immediately. Service was clean, professional, undeniable. Her initial response, through counsel, was restrained. No allegations. No emotional neglect narrative. The evidence had removed that option. What emerged instead was a quiet scramble, a sudden push toward negotiated settlement, a pivot away from the aggressive positioning she'd been preparing. She wanted containment now. Not triumph. Not headlines. The private meeting with Madeline happened as scheduled. Quiet. Controlled. I presented only what was necessary. The affair, the overlap with my professional sphere, the potential risk to both our businesses. No embellishment. Just facts. Madeline absorbed it with clinical composure. Not surprised, but grateful for the discretion. We agreed on one thing: this wouldn't spiral publicly. But her next steps regarding Eric would be her own. And swift. And they were. By the following month, Eric's marriage was publicly unraveling. Word moved fast through professional circles. Our client relationship with Madeline's firm ended, cleanly, but with finality. Another loss, but an inevitable one. I accepted it without regret. At home, the collapse was quieter but no less complete. Friends, once drawn into her growth narrative, began drifting away as the truth leaked through private channels. The affair, the financial positioning, the carefully crafted narrative. Some friendships ended outright. Others remained, but shifted, warier, less trusting. Our home emptied in phases. I moved into a new space, temporary, but necessary. The legal process proceeded efficiently, my preparation having set the tone. No protracted battle. No theatrical court scenes, just steady division and dissolution. Emotionally, the impact ran deeper than I expected. I wasn't naive. I'd known the marriage was ending the moment she'd uttered the word. Redefine. But knowing is different from living the aftershock. Nights alone in the new apartment hit harder than planned. Memories surfaced at odd moments. Small things. Her laugh during a rainstorm years ago. The look on her face when we first signed for the house. Grief, even when deserved, still cuts. Therapy helped. Not a cure, nothing instant, but a grounding. Trust had been shattered, not just in her, but in my own judgment. Rebuilding that would take longer than any legal process. Professionally, damage control stabilized. Some clients remained solid. Others drifted. A reshaped portfolio emerged, leaner, but under my terms. Thank you for watching. Bye.